Here, ready. We're going live right now with me and Christian McCullum. We'll have Jamie Uyama is going to jump on here a little later, and we're going to talk to him about what's going on and get his thoughts as well on some of this. But Chris, today it's going to be really recruiting centric. We're going to just be talking about the class 2022, 2023, all those kind of topics. Kind of looked at some of the rankings that were out there. I didn't understand. I couldn't even find ESPN's. It was like behind a paywall. I'm not even sure what the point of that is. But Notre Dame was 7th in Rivals, 7th in 24/7, 6th in On3, which gives this the best class that Notre Dame signed in quite some time. If you ask some Irish fans, they were a little disappointed because it could have been better. But man, 6 is pretty good. It's not where you want to be, but with a coaching change, they certainly finished higher than any other team with a coaching change. And I think that says a lot about how this thing, they did a fantastic job closing this thing out. And I think Irish fans should be really excited about that.
Yeah, and again, we talked about this yesterday, but timing really drives the narrative, right? So it's like people that were kind of disappointed. It's because you get all this interest into one day, put it all into one day, and you want to see who you're going to land on National Signing Day, and you actually lose a guy. That's kind of like that kind of brings the wins out of the sails. But when you look at it as a whole, like you said, and you look at all the guys they signed, the people that fill those spaces, the prospects they have to fill in there, obviously wide receiver and safety, they kind of struck out there. But you look at what they did on the offensive line. You look at it did at linebacker. Obviously they got a quality running back. The one receiver they did sign was big time. Linebacker's huge, like I said. So overall, yeah, I think it's great. And if they didn't lock these guys down, like within that last weekend when everyone came back for their second official visit, and you were sitting there seeing if you're going to hang on to Junior Tuihalamaka, or you're going to hang on to Emil Wagner, is J.D. Price looking around, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 those guys all send their national letters of intent in, everyone's celebrating. But the fact that they locked those guys down so quickly, it kind of takes the drama out of it. So, I think once people step back from National Signing Day and start to look at the players they have coming in, and the fact that so many of them are coming in early, will be able to provide an impact, I think that's when people will really start to appreciate the class.
When you look at the teams that were kind of in the top 3, familiar teams, of course, Alabama, Georgia, A&M seemed to be the 3 that everybody had kind of above everybody else. And when you look at their class, it's justified. I mean, they got some big time recruits, all those did. And there still is, in my opinion, a plateau. Those guys kind of hit this plateau, and then everybody else is kind of just a shade below that. A&M's a little bit new to this as far as this goes. There's been a lot of speculation about how that happened. And if you hear the speculation about, maybe there was some shenanigans going on, I mean, that's just one of those things that Notre Dame's just never going to get into. And if it was happening at A&M, I'm sure it's happening at other places. And again, this is just speculation that people have put out there, not verified, that type of stuff. But if it's going to happen there, it's going to happen at A&M or at Alabama. It's going to happen at Georgia. Pretty much everybody in the SEC. Do you think Notre Dame can ever climb into that top 3 type of situation? Because they're clearly not going to get involved in that type of stuff.
Individually, like an individual season, yeah, I think they will be able to, like year in, year out, always being there in that top 3. I think that's much more of a challenge. And we've talked about this before, and let's leave out any certain schools' names. But obviously we have relationships with, people who do our job at other schools. And I always find it funny when we get together and there's a group of us from all over the country talking, recruiting. It's different. It's different at these other places. It's hard to overstate that. I mean, they're talking literal dollars and cents. You
Oh
know
yeah.
what I mean?
Oh
And
yeah.
then they'll say, well, you guys bought that guy. And then I'll say, well, what happened? Why didn't you go? Well, we ran out of money. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so it's talked about. It is open.
And
The
everybody knows it.
negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they'll tell you, you can see, fans will speculate. They'll see an announcement and they'll say, ooh, mom didn't look happy about that. Or, someone didn't look happy about that announcement. And you find out, mom's mad, she has to give the money back.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
like, these are things that happen. Again, not saying any specific recruits or team names, but these things are things that are factual things that happen.
Oh,
So Notre Dame is not ever going to get into the game like that. And will they be able to compete with those guys on a year in, year out basis? I don't think so in terms of being in that top 3 every year. Will there be years where they have a chance at, all right, we're positioned where, our kind of core is kind of what it is here now. And here we have 3 to 4 to 5 other elite prospects. And Marcus Freeman is going to try to do his thing. Can we land 2 or 3 of these guys that are really, really blue chip guys that'll push us into that group? Yeah, I could see that happening, from time to time.
You have to wonder if they would have landed C.J. Williams, Morian Walker, and Devin Moore, and maybe like an Anthony Lucas. They would have gone up there. They would have. They wouldn't have gotten the top 3, but I think they could have climbed to 4, and that's without any of this cheating, right? And that's with a head coach who just really didn't even try in recruiting, and so I want people to understand. It can happen. It absolutely can happen. And the way it can happen is the way Marcus Freeman talked about it in his press conference. How can you compete? Well, we just outwork them. And that is the way that this happened. It's not like, Florida wasn't some crazy recruiting juggernaut before Urban Meyer showed up. You know what I mean? They weren't getting everybody under the sun. And how did that happen? He just outworked everybody. That's just the reality of it. You guys can say whatever you want about Nick Saban. That guy just outworks everybody. He just does. And that's why he's successful. And he's obviously done a great job with all this type of stuff. But, and of course it helps if you got a bag man and all this type of stuff. And I'm not saying that Nick does that or anybody. I'm not saying specific people, but like you said, we get down there with the recruiting guys and we have these conversations, and if the first couple times you go down there, you've always kind of heard these stories, but you never really heard the stories, and then you hear the stories and you're like, wow, I mean, it's amazing Notre Dame can compete really sometimes when you think about it, and so what I think has to happen for Notre Dame is they have to find the people who aren't going to be persuaded by that. And that's really hard. I mean, a lot of people just don't have a lot of money. Heck, I tell you what, Chris, somebody gave you $100,000, you'd be like, you know what, maybe I ought to consider this. You know what I mean? I think everybody you'd be foolish not to at least consider it. But at the same time, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who would have. And, it's easy to sit and judge when you're not presented that opportunity. And so it just is what it is. Notre Dame's going to have to compete. But this is why I'm so excited about the future of Notre Dame football, is because, here's a guy who said everything at that press conference that we could ever possibly hope for, right? In my opinion, when you think of the things that he said, Chris, was, we're going to out-recruit everybody. And I'm the lead recruiter, right? I'm the guy that these people are going to know the most. I'm going to work the hardest. And the reason I'm going to work the hardest is because, you can't ask your staff to do a whole bunch of things that you're not willing to do. That's not fair. That's just not fair. They have families just like you have families. And yes, you have responsibilities that are different than theirs, but everybody's still working hard. And so Marcus Freeman comes up to the mic and says, hey, I'm just going to outwork everybody, and I'm the lead guy, and I'm hoping that, or he said hope, but I think it's more of I'm going to demand that that's going to motivate my staff to work as hard as I am in this, and then we're going to push this thing to the finish line where it needs to be. He said so many things in that press conference that were so important, when you're talking about recruiting, and I think that when you listen to Mike Elston and you listen to Tommy Rees talking about the situation, and Tommy Rees was saying, yeah, it helps. When I can call, when I'm talking to a recruit and I can say, well, if you don't believe me, here, talk to the head coach, and the head coach will pick up the phone and answer it and talk to him. That makes a huge difference. And, I think we've tried not to harp on it as much during the situation. You mean when Kelly was here? Because it doesn't do Notre Dame any good to sit and complain about it on these shows and things like that. But now that it's gone, it's important for people to understand this was a huge roadblock for Notre Dame recruiting, and LSU is going to find out. I don't expect Brian Kelly to suddenly enjoy recruiting. It's just I don't see that happening, and we'll see. But I guess we'll see. I just don't see it now. Chris, I think the next question for Notre Dame is, what do you think it's going to take to start landing the guys like Anthony Lucas and Cyrus Moss? Do you think it's a situation where these guys just weren't interested? Do you think it was a situation where, because obviously the head coach, meaning Marcus Freeman, was recruiting those guys pretty heavily himself and wasn't successful. But I think you need some of those guys to kind of get over the top. What do you think it's going to take to get over the top and start to land guys like that?
Well, I think Freeman being the head coach will help, in addition to being a defensive coordinator. And I think part of it is like an image thing, right? So we all know, everyone knows Notre Dame is often in a battle, and it seems this way with Lucas, where mom and dad want Notre Dame, kid wants somewhere else. And Notre Dame doesn't win a lot of those battles, and for the most part, it's probably for the best, because I'm kind of a believer in, if a kid doesn't want to be somewhere, when they hit adversity, they're not going to figure out how to fight through the adversity. They're going to start thinking, I didn't want to be here anyways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, sometimes it works out, and sometimes it's not a huge gulf between mom and dad and kid. But I think now with Marcus Freeman as a head coach, the kid's going to be a little bit more interested. And Marcus Freeman's going to make them a little bit more interested. So now when mom and dad are also on board with Notre Dame, it's not like, it's just my mom and dad. They want that school. School's lame. They're not going to think that's not going to be their overall impression. Yeah. So Marcus Freeman will help in that department. But in the end, 2-3 years from now, when we're talking about building this thing, it's going to come back to what you always say, Mike. It's going to be winning. Right? You this is great. We got a lot of juice going. Marcus Freeman's got a lot of energy, and I firmly believe that's not coach speak. All that stuff he's going to do. He's not just saying that. You mentioned our Saban and Urban Meyer. What was the biggest thing with those guys? Those guys are pathological. They want to win. They want to compete. You think Marcus Freeman wants to compete on the recruiting trail? Absolutely. Yeah. That's what that guy's living for right now. So it's going to be that tenacity that he brings. And that'll get through 23, maybe even 24. But when we get to 25, wins and continuing success on the field is going to be hugely important as well.
I'm glad you brought up wins, because I think that's the issue. I'm sure Anthony Lucas had a strong interest, but when you lose to Cincinnati, that hurts your credibility of, we're going to get over the hump. We can do this. And when you lose like you do to Alabama, the reason teams get some juice is when you start winning these games that are big games, and people are like, look, A&M, half the reason they had all this success is because most of the guys that are in this class were at that game when they beat Alabama. You win a game like that, and you see the crowd rush the field, and you're a part of that, and you get to celebrate as a fan and then realize, holy crap, I could be here on the field and being a part of that to be the reason why we beat them. Extremely powerful. And that was one of the biggest reasons that they were so successful in this recruiting class, is you get a big win against Alabama at home, and fans just go crazy. It was such a huge boost. Notre Dame hasn't had a lot of those opportunities. They had Clemson last year.
Great to have recruits there, right?
Yeah, but there were no recruits there. And of course you have the stigma of, well, Lawrence didn't play, and a couple guys didn't play, and And people, heck, if that's all ESPN says, that's all they believe, and that's the way it is. And so I think part of that was, the Clemson win was good. There's no question about it. It was good for the program, good for recruiting. It just wasn't as good as it could have been had all the pieces fell into place, like being able to attend the game and Trevor Lawrence played. And I'm not sure if Trevor Lawrence played that it would have mattered. I really don't think so. It just seemed to be Notre Dame's night that night. You couldn't.
DJ threw for what, 400 yards?
Yeah, I mean, Trevor Lawrence couldn't have played any better than DJ did. I mean, honestly, he really couldn't have. So it just is what it is. And I think for Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman to get over that hump, it's winning those games, but also the message of what they're doing. And as you mentioned, the perception of Notre Dame, I think, has changed now. I think it's changed for a lot of people who are minorities in that, here's Notre Dame. And as we talked about before, Notre Dame will get credit for hiring a minority coach, but they should get a lot more credit because now they've hired the second minority coach, and one after he failed miserably and then basically said Notre Dame was racist for firing him. I mean, that took a lot of balls to come back and do this again, especially on a completely and totally unproven coach. And I think that's going to ring, people are going to look at that, and I think it's going to open some eyes. It looks like we got the Yama here. Let's get him in.
The other thing,
he finally showing up. I don't know. Should we even put him in here? What do you think?
He said he was dealing with Toronto traffic. Toronto, I've never been to Toronto, but I think it's
there's like 7 people that live there, I think. Yeah. 7 people that live there. They all have guns and they all shoot each other. That's what happens up there in Toronto. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Wow, you nailed it, spot on.
I love the Yama, man. I have so much fun with you guys.
Yeah.
Me and Jamie are gonna be together soon.
Yeah, you guys are going to be together soon down in the Army All-American game.
Yeah,
you guys haven't seen each other for a couple years now because you haven't been to the opening together. You haven't. Yeah.
What's funny is I've probably still seen Jamie more in the last few years than I've seen some of my friends.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, more than you've seen me in person, which is weird.
Yeah, that's true.
Really is. Yeah. So we just kind of finished that topic, and now we'll get we'll go into a new one here with the Yama as well, and that is. What do you think Notre Dame did well in this recruiting cycle? Where do you think they made improvements? And where do you think they still need to improve upon? I mean, I think we've singled out a couple things in that, boy, Fighting Irish Media, I think that was huge what they've done. And just an incredible jump in performance. And Mike Elston, I think, did the very smart thing by praising that whole group and what a great job they've done. But when you talk about the situation now, we'll start with you, Yama. What do you think they did really well in this cycle, and what do you think they still need to improve on?
Well, I think they identified who the top guys, their top of the board guys were early, and they really attacked it, especially on defense. And I think obviously with the finish and even at receiver, you could say, well, I mean, it didn't finish well, but they had those guys like, CJ Williams, Amorian Walker, like they identified those guys early and said, this is who we want. And so they did a good job of doing that. And really when they needed to close in the summer, when they got all those guys on campus, I mean, tremendous job, because that was the question, because Notre Dame was doing really well. And it's one thing to do well when everything, you're talking with people and they're like, I'm excited about Notre Dame, this and that. And then they get to campus and you got to close. And they closed on basically that's why over the summer they were mostly done, right? They were mostly done. And there was some questions on offensive line and whatnot. But for the most part, you run it down, they were mostly done. And I think even when you see, the fact that they could go, it didn't turn out well in terms of landing an Anthony Lucas or an Xavier Nwankpa at the end, but they were able to kind of land the core of the class and then say we're going to take our best shot at these guys. And it didn't work out that way that they landed them, but I'd much rather them do that, get that core, and then say, okay, well, these big fish guys who are going to choose near the end anyways, then you can put all that effort into it. And so I thought that like strategy of doing that was really, really good.
Chris, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I think, like Jamie said, one of the things they did, and Mike, me and you talked about this when Marcus Freeman first got there, is like, okay, that's great. You're going for the best guys in the country, and you seem to be getting some traction there. But if you don't close some of these guys, it's almost counterproductive because we're wasting resources and time and energy on these guys that just to finish second or third. And obviously, you're not going to win them all, but he won enough of them. You know what I mean? He won enough of them that was great. So I think that was really good. I think one of the things is obvious. It's been the question that people have been asking all week is like, where were the backup options at receiver? So, I mean, my wife follows this stuff from, just being peripheral listening.
Yeah, so does mine. Yeah.
So we were talking about it yesterday.
Can't help it. Yeah.
And, she's like, oh, well, why didn't they, Joe Griffin is in our hometown and he's friends with people. Why didn't they at least have him recruit him a little harder? And then you could have told the other kid, you could have had some leverage on the other kid at a certain time. And she didn't mean specifically Joe Griffin, just as an example.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, that's what everyone on our board is asking.
Today,
why didn't they do something like that?
Yeah.
So I think that's something where they need to be cognizant of, right? It's like, all right, and we talked about that yesterday. I'm like, all right, are you all in or not all in? If you're not all in, all right, well, we have these other guys, and we're bringing them in. And like Jamie pointed out, they were wrapped up pretty good here in the summer. Yeah. And so when you get 80% of your class committing in the summer, you can go to these other guys and kind of put some pressure on them. Say, hey, man, everyone's jumping on board. You can see what's happening. Are you in? And, whether they're in or not, now you can kind of expand the board a little bit. And it's delicate. It doesn't mean, okay, you're not in, you're out. It means, okay, we understand you need to look around, but we need to look around too now. So we need to keep, looking at different targets and covering our bases, essentially. And I think that was something that, I think Notre Dame would agree that that's something that they probably should have done, especially at receiver.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And we talked about Amorian Walker and C.J. Williams. Best thing that ever happened is neither one of those guys came. And I know Irish fans are going to say that's ridiculous, but that's true. It really is, and I'll tell you why. If they didn't start right away, they'd be gone anyway. And then you wouldn't have the opportunity to recruit 4 or 5 receivers this year because you took 2 last year that will end up transferring later, and you won't know that until December when they're leaving, and you won't have time to recruit more players. So I think what's going to happen if you're a coach at Notre Dame and at a lot of places is, unless you get a guy like Xavier Owamka that's elite and you're convincing and you're trying to get him to come and he's kind of on the fence, if you got a guy like an Amorian Walker who has a high ceiling, but it certainly is a project, you got to cut bait on Amorian Walker. Cut bait early and start focusing on somebody who really does want to be here, because if it doesn't work out with this new transfer portal and the rule, they're gone anyway. They'll be gone like that. We know right now there's guys that are playing a lot of football at Notre Dame who are thinking about transferring. It doesn't make any sense. But, you hear these things and you're like, why would you even consider this? But that's the kind of society we're in right now that, hey, if I'm not the star, I'm going to go try and be the star somewhere else. And I think there's going to have to be a little bit of a reality slapped in the face of, let's see what happens to some of these people in the transfer portal after this year. When they think grass is greener, we'll see how greener that grass is at some FCS school, which is where a lot of these guys are going to end up. And they don't realize that, but that's where it's coming. And so to me, I think it makes perfect sense that if you got a guy like Amorian Walker, who is a high ceiling guy, but is certainly a project, and he's being difficult, boom, you're gone. Cut him. Let's recruit somebody else. Yama, your thoughts?
I'm 100% with you. These guys, they weren't going to stick. Even they signed, it didn't matter. First sign at adversity, those guys are gone. And just because we've seen that over and over again, right? And even someone like Anthony Lucas, who parents wanted him at Indy. Well, anytime someone chooses for what their parents think is best and not what they want, those guys never last at Notre Dame. They never do. And it's just because Marcus Freeman said it yesterday in the press conference. We're going to do it the hard way, and that's how it is at Notre Dame. And if someone isn't prepared to do it the hard way, they don't last at Notre Dame.
No, no.
They don't last, right? So, um, and you know what? Like you said about the guys, there are guys who play. I mean, that's everywhere, not just Notre Dame, where
Oh, sure.
guys
Yeah.
are unhappy about whatever. But I mean, that's also a thing where you have to manage the
Yeah.
roster
Yeah.
within it, and you have to be able to do that and talk to guys and lay it to them straight, but also kind of like massage their egos, and that goes on all the time because I mean, there's like a long list of guys that you're like, man, that always talk about. I thought about transferring after my sophomore year. I thought about transferring here, but they stuck it out, and then things went good for them. And there's far more guys who end up sticking it out than not. But it's just goes to show you though that like you have to be ever, and so you have to always be recruiting the guys that you have on your team too, and that is kind of like society today. So I always thought like with Xavier Watts, it's great that I think he showed a lot at the end of the year, and that he's going to potentially
Oh, yeah.
be a really good player for Notre Dame at safety. But I always thought like they're listing him on the depth chart at Rover like
Yeah.
immediately, and even when he wasn't playing, Brian Kelly was saying nice things about him because they're like, we got to keep this guy on the
Yeah.
roster.
Yeah.
So they're trying to like put it out there, right? And that's just the thing you got to do today, right? That's college football. And as frustrating as that is, it's just that's how it is with players, and that's why I think what Freeman said and what Tommy Rees echoed as well is that it's got to be a player-driven program
Mhm.
because and it's got to be you're not letting them run everything, but it's their culture. Like they were saying with Jack Swarbrick, they're telling Jack Swarbrick, it's their culture. And that's what's mattered. These guys have to be able to do that. And then if you get enough guys to buy in, and then anyone who's like a rotten apple, those guys are out anyways, right?
Yeah.
And it's got to be, that's how you do it. You establish it with the players. This is their culture. And I think that's one of the reasons why Notre Dame has been so good, because it was certainly not Brian Kelly. Like, man, I was all here for Brian Kelly. There's going to be no one on the team who's going to be like, man, I'm out of here. I'm going to LSU. That's not happening.
Yeah.
That's not happening. And that's why you didn't see anyone, even the guys who flipped, none of those guys were like, man, I'm going to Brian Kelly. Like Devin Moore decommitted because Brian Kelly left. It had nothing to do with Brian Kelly leaving.
No.
He was just like, this is my chance to get out, right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about Florida, whatever. That was his chance to get out.
Well, that's the
100%.
interesting thing because, we've heard all this speculation. We heard, rumors that Xavier and Wamka, one of the reasons he didn't want to go to Notre Dame is he didn't like Brian Kelly. We had Billy Strauss come out and say he didn't like him. I think that sentiment was very. I think that was a opinion held by a lot of people, and now I think you're going to see something completely different when it comes to recruiting, where people are going to be into the head coach, and to be fair to Kelly, I don't think it's like anybody hated him. It's just they didn't have a relationship with him because he didn't foster one. He didn't even try to develop a relationship with him. So, I could understand why some kids would be, I don't like Brian Kelly because I'm going to Notre Dame in spite of Brian Kelly because all these other head coaches called me every day. Maureen Walker, Harbaugh called you every day. I couldn't imagine what you would talk about with Harbaugh every day, but I got to feel that made a big impact in this situation. Again, who cares about a Maureen Walker at this point? Notre Dame's got to move on, but I just think that you'll see a lot of these kids are going to have a lot better relationship, and they're going to be more willing to stick with their commitment to Notre Dame because they have that relationship, not just with their position coach, but also with the head coach, and that's going to really be important. All right, guys. How do you think Notre Dame recruiting will change now with Marcus Freeman at the helm? What do you think, Christian?
It's going to be what we've talked about. They're going the staff members are going to be held accountable to an extreme level, and what that's going to result in is continued contact, steady, consistent contact And not that they weren't, right. Always, usually I would talk to guys and, hey, what's the contact like with you in Notre Dame? Oh, we talk every Wednesday or we talk every Monday. But I think he's also going to be demanding. You've talked before, Mike, about Urban Meyer would give this guys a list and say, this guy needs to be here for junior day. Okay,
Yep.
not, hey, what's going on? Are we going to get him here for junior day? He needs to be here for junior day. Figure it out. I think Marcus Freeman will do a better job of being involved in that. So if I'm Chris O'Leary and I'm saying, yeah, coach, I really want to get him here too, but mom and dad or something's going on, they're having some things. Maybe you can help me out. Gotcha. I'm on the call. I'm on the Zoom. Hey, we'd love to have you up on campus. Let's get here. Let's show you around. Mike Elston made a good point yesterday during the press conference, the way they'll be able to utilize these virtual presentations to entice families to get to campus more.
Yeah.
So I think what you'll see is a lot more visits and a lot more. It won't be. They'll be able to be more judicious with their visits if they're able to get players from around the country, the top people on campus. They'll be able to say, all right, we're going to have these guys here, and whether it's as early as you take official visits early now, then they'll continue having these recruiting events that they've had in the summer, like the barbecue and stuff like that. All those things are really good. Getting guys in more and more on campus for game days, I think that will all be really good, and I think that'll translate. And then, they've already done the metrics. They did the metrics years ago, which shouldn't really be a shock. I don't, they getting players on campus is a huge indicator for Notre Dame signing that player. So ultimately, when you look at this thing in stages, it has to be, all right, we'd have to have form better relationships with these guys. The better relationships you have, the easier it's going to be to get on the campus, and the easier it is to get on the campus, the easier it's going to get them to stay in the game and then ultimately close. So I think that's what you'll see kind of in order.
Yeah, to me, I think that the critical thing that Marcus Freeman mentioned is that we don't know at this point who's a Notre Dame guy, and who really fits at this point. And it used to kind of drive me nuts when you would hear excuses like, well, we don't offer because we don't know whether we can get them in, and we don't know their personality, and we have to. What? Who cares? Get them on campus. Figure it out, right? It doesn't. You don't have to take a commitment. If you offer somebody and they say, immediately, you may have a problem if they want to commit immediately on the spot. But a couple days go by, a week, a month, whatever the case is, you don't have to take that kid, and they oftentimes don't. I mean, we know about kids that have wanted to commit and they didn't take, and you don't want to do that all the time. But at the same time, you won't know if a guy is a good fit or not until you get him on campus and get around him and get him around your players and let the players talk to him and figure it out. So I just think that what he said is so true. And for a while, I think Notre Dame kind of missed on some opportunities because they were so slow doing their investigation on trying to figure out whether somebody was a good fit for Notre Dame. And I think that you'll see more kids on campus that you're like, it's kind of like who's the Sailor, the Georgia offensive lineman,
Jamari Sailor.
Yeah, Jamari Sailor. Notre Dame got him on campus. It seemed like things were gonna, they may have a shot, and then they got him on campus, and he didn't really feel it at Notre Dame, and I'm not sure Notre Dame felt like he fit there either. No disrespect to him, that's just kind of the way it goes. But hey, at least they got him on campus and had a shot. That's really, really important to do that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But at least you had a shot by getting him on campus and getting putting your best foot forward and seeing what happens. And so they need to take more chances like that, and we'll see what happens. All right. So 2023 is going to be real important in recruiting. We all know that. They're off to a great start right now. But offense is really critical. We all know this. You want to try and improve offensively and get some more elite players. How does a defensive-minded coach become highly effective as an offensive recruiter, Jamie? I mean, how can he become highly effective as an offensive recruiter, if he's a defensive-minded guy?
Well, I think it's all about like the relationship and just, him connecting to those guys on a personal level if he's going to be involved like he says he is, right? And I think that's the main thing. And also it's like how Tommy Rees said that he was, felt like he had to step up his game and no one wants to be the black sheep on the staff. I think it's largely like him trying to, he's going to connect that dots. But what it's going to come down to is it's going to come down to Tommy Rees and the position coaches. And not to say that I don't want to say that any of the coaches on the staff were passengers as recruiters, because I don't think guys were lazy. I don't think that's fair to label it as that. But there's definitely, not everyone was at the same standard, right? And I think it's just simply going to be, everyone is going to have to meet that standard, or else you're not going to be on the staff. Which is why, whenever these, the new hires come in January, as we expect, right? Those guys are all going to be, it's going to be a prerequisite that these guys bust their butt in recruiting. It's going to, that they're going to have to be there. It's not, and it doesn't have to be someone that has, oh, this guy was at Florida before and he, has this track record of landing all these elite guys. It doesn't have to be that, right? Because we've seen that it's not always about like where the guy's from. It's just about how hard they work and how much they're willing to sell. And it's hard at Notre Dame because you got to travel and there's so many, balls you have to have in the air to try to juggle these players from around the country. But that's what it takes. So I think that's going to be the main thing. Is it's just going to be, and it's just kind of building on what Christian said. It's like top down. It's top down from Freeman to everyone else and spreading. And I don't think he's going to be ever going to be like, think he's going to be the closer. I think he's always going to be involved and trying to be there or whatever. But the key thing is he will be getting the guys, on that staff that are going to be able to connect with these guys and really push and do what is necessary.
All right. Sorry, I had to take care of it. We got some guys spamming our chat here, so I'm bouncing them.
Few of them.
Yeah, exactly. I had to bounce them. So anyway, Christian, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I obviously what Jamie said, those are the big things. The other thing I'd add is, Marcus Freeman giving Tommy Rees his stamp of approval in terms of amongst offensive, recruits, their coaches and family, where, he comes in, he's the head coach, and he kind of explains, like, Tommy Rees explained a lot of this during these podcasts that he's done, where it's almost like a marriage, right? It's like, hey, man, this is my guy. Tommy Rees is going to be able to explain to these offensive recruits, I wasn't staying here unless Marcus got the job, because we see eye to eye. And now Marcus Freeman comes in and says, hey, man, I'm a defensive coach, and I wanted Tommy as my offensive coordinator. We're in this together. And so basically what Tommy tells you, that's what it is. You know what I mean? I'm giving it. So it's going to give, we talked about Tommy Rees getting more autonomy in the offense. I think it's going to translate to the recruiting trail as well, where Marcus Freeman is sitting there basically saying, yep, he's co-signing. I'm co-signing what Tommy's told you already. And let's talk about it if you want. But, just understand that, he speaks for me in a sense. And I think that'll give him a lot of authority on the trail.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a collaboration. Marcus Freeman has to work really closely with Tommy Rees, and they got to have the same message. They got to do it together. I think they need to be on the calls together sometimes, and on the Zoom calls together, and in the meetings together with these offensive recruits, because everybody's gonna say, hey, you're a defensive guy. We love you. We love your personality, but what's that gonna mean for the offense? But just to have the head coach involved, but then let Tommy kind of lead the show as far as I'm the voice of the offense, but then also have Marcus Freeman there in support saying, yeah, that, it's, I'm the head coach, but yeah, I endorse exactly what Tommy's saying here. This is exactly what we're going to do. So there is no confusion. And nobody can attack and say, well, Tommy says that, but what does the head coach say? Well, the head coach is saying right there in the thing saying, well, yeah, this is exactly what's going to happen. And so I think it's really got to be a collaborative effort, not just with Rees and Freeman, but also if it's a wide receiver, whoever the wide receiver coach is with Freeman. And the same thing, it's just got to be a very collaborative effort. We know defensively he's going to do great as far as recruiting goes, and already is. That's what we're going to talk about next. We already got 7 commitments 2 defensive ends, 1 linebacker, 1 corner, 1 safety. So when you look at that, 5 out of the 7 are already on defense. You got 1 running back, 1 tight end. What do you think right now are the most important needs as far as recruiting in 2023? Let's start with you, Jamie. What do you think?
Oh, 100% receiver.
Well, we all know that, yes.
Yeah. I mean, should we just end the chat right now? Like,
Yeah.
I think, receiver, not only elite guys, but numbers. They absolutely, so how they treated the linebacker group this year and made that a priority and landed like the elite guys and they got the numbers they wanted. That's how it has to be at receiver next year, right? Which is why, like, there can't be a settling. There has to be like a backup plan to the backup plan, really, because you can't afford to have this many things. You can't have to go in the portal because Notre Dame isn't a program that can go into the portal every year and find what they're looking for. You know, they might be able to find 1 guy, maybe 2 guys lucky on a good year, but like most times there's going to be no guys there for them. So you end up with like a Freddie Canteen type of guy. And you can't, I don't want to take shots at Freddie Canteen, but I'm just saying, like, he never played at Notre Dame. He was never going to play. He didn't play at Michigan, right? You end up taking guys that didn't play, didn't produce somewhere else, and then you hope that it works out there. That's not a good strategy, right? That's like, hope isn't a good strategy. So they need to like absolutely just hit numbers there. And hit elite guys that can and probably get that at least have a shot to play right away, because, you know, depth wise, let's just say all these guys come back, like say Lindsey comes back, Austin comes back, Avery Davis comes back, you know, for a 6 year, whatever. They still have, you know, all those guys will be gone the next year. And, you know, that's still a lot of numbers to fill, right? So I really think that first and foremost, and then after that, I think defensive tackle, I think it's
huge.
Critical.
Yeah.
Critical. Right?
I agree.
Critical in this class. You have to land, I would think 2 at least. You know, you have to land 2 guys. And then I would always say corner. I mean, safety, you know, obviously as well, but I think corner, and I think they got a great start with Justin Rett. But I think they have good corners in this class, but you got to find those guys who can be the elite corners. Justin Rett has the potential to be an elite corner. Keep landing, like, obviously they're in on Christian Gray right now. He's another guy who I think has really, really high ceiling. Keep it going with that. Like, that to me, because when you're going to play these teams, you're going to play Ohio State, you're going to play Clemson, all these teams loaded at receiver, you got to be able to match up a corner.
Chris, your thoughts?
That's why we call him the Yama, right? Because he's got these philosophical, hope is not a good strategy. I love it. It makes perfect sense.
He's the Yama.
Yeah, that's the Yama, you know, the dash the Yama. Obviously, like he said, receiver, D tackle, corner, those are big. They already got they already got tight end and running back. You know, I think one thing that people are always going to want is quarterback. You know what I mean? We're trying to get an elite quarterback, and where they position themselves so far in 23 is pretty solid position. And now it comes down to the difficult part, right? Do we wait for this guy? Do we take this guy?
Yeah.
What do we do? What's the timing of it? But that's the position, even though it's difficult, that you kind of want to be in. Yeah, it'd be awesome. If Arch Manning were to have committed a month ago, that'd be great. That's the ideal situation, right? But you put yourself in a position where you have a handful of guys who've been to campus. They're interested in them. They're interested in you, and you're interested in them. And now we have to see how much do we push? Do we want this guy? Are we willing to wait for that guy? And that's just a strategical part of this. And that will be interesting to see how they handle that position.
I think you have to kind of look at it too as you know, when you, because I think you can say we need these guys, we need these numbers, but I think it's also important to say we need an elite guy here, okay? And so, like, if I'm judging the class, like, I put together some numbers. I think they need at least 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, at least probably 4 wide receivers right now, unless we see what happens with the portal. They have 1 tight end, may take 2. I don't think they need more than 3 offensive linemen because they've taken 10 in the last, but we'll see what happens whether guys leave or that type of thing. That may change. But I agree with you, Jamie. I think they need at least 2 interior defensive linemen, maybe even 3. They already have 2 defensive ends committed. Will they need another? I think if you can get an elite pass rusher, heck yeah, you take them. How many linebackers? They already have Drake Bowen committed. Do they need any more after that? Not sure. I would take 3 corners. I absolutely would. You can never have enough corners, especially because a lot of them are the way they take them are 6-foot guys, and most guys that are 6 foot can grow into at least a safety, at some point. And so, and then maybe 2 safeties. But I think the important part is what is critical, and that is I think it's really critical to get an elite quarterback at this point. I like Drew Pine. I like Angeli. But at the same time, I wouldn't say either of those guys are elite. And you really need to grab. Now, I think, Angeli has potential to be a really good player. And so does Drew Pine. But I don't think coming into high school or coming out of high school, you'd say that's an elite quarterback. They have a good running back right now, but I want to see another speed guy. I want to see another guy like J.D. Price that can flat hit the home run. For wide receiver, they're going to need some big guys, but they need some guys who are fast that can stretch the field. And so I think speed is really, really important in this particular wide receiver class. They got the tight end they need already. Flanagan's the perfect tight end for what they have when you consider the pieces that they have already. But when it comes to interior defensive linemen, Jamie, I want somebody who's 300 pounds right now that can move as well. That's what they really need, is an elite guy who can play early. And they really need an elite interior defensive lineman this year. I think that's just as important as the wide receiver position right now. They already got 2 elite defensive ends. They got to hold on to those guys. But if you can get another elite pass rusher, heck yeah. And as you mentioned, corner, they got to get. They already have Rhett. I'd love to see him get Malik Muhammad, and Gray as well. You land those 3, and that's a pretty darn good class at that situation. Anything you guys want to add to that?
The one thing I'll say is
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
You're too damn polite.
The defensive tackle. I think exactly what you just to hit on what you said, Mike. Those 300-pound he wasn't necessarily because the defense was different, but a Stephon Tuitt type, of guy of that level, of that caliber.
Yep.
Who obviously Tuitt, was a guy who was that big right away. Contributed a little bit as a freshman, and then obviously really took off as a sophomore. But a guy of that caliber, I think that's
has to be
at least one of them. At least
they
one
really
of those
need
guys
2.
If they could get 2 of them, wow,
yeah.
like that. Because look at what Texas A&M is doing right now, right? And that is the kind of thing that can flip the equation for them, right? And because those are normally guys that end up at Bama, right? So that to me those guys are going to be critically important.
Yeah. All right. Here we go. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say on the quarterback part, when you're talking about getting an elite quarterback, I saw a good analogy earlier today. I don't know where it originated from, but it basically said, to win the national championship, you either got to build the Death Star or find a Jedi.
Yeah.
And so, that quarterback, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a Jedi,
no doubt,
who's going to be able to, take you over the top.
Yep, no doubt about it. No doubt. All right, so I wasn't going to take questions, but this is a good question, so I just wanted to get it out there. He wanted you to answer it, Chris. Indy's off to a great start, 2023. Can you name 5 to 7 names of guys you feel are most important still on the board, need more than stars? What do you think?
Well, I'd say we were talking about quarterbacks. So you look at guys like Dante Moore, Chris Vezina, and Jackson Arnold are kind of – you throw A.V. Johnson in there as well. He that's a good, group right there. You look at the running backs, like you said, Mike, you already got Cedric Irvin committed. They're in pretty heavily with Justice Haynes and Jaden Lamar. Receivers kind of, it's a little shaky. There was a lot of stuff on Carnell Tate earlier, but, if he was getting announced in November, that would have been great for Notre Dame, but he didn't. So that was kind of somewhat skeptical. Offensive line, you got some guys. Chase Bisontis down in Jersey, Don Bosco. I visited with him this fall. He seems really, really interesting. Monroe Freeling, he's kind of a guy that seems to go back and forth a little bit and how interested he is in Notre Dame, but there's definitely some genuine interest. You got Charles Jagusa, he was down for a game. Samson Okonla, he's been pretty good. Caden Proctor's that's a guy though, right? So like if you get someone like him, you can kind of build it around. And then the other guys on defense, you probably for the most part you got a lot of so many of your top guys. You mentioned Malik Muhammad, obviously he'd be another guy that would be great, as well as AJ Harris. But for the most part on defense,
Bowen, I think it's safety.
Peyton Bowen.
Yeah, I put Peyton Bowen in there for sure.
Yes. And then the Samuel and Pemba kid from IMG.
I like him a lot.
Yeah, he'd be another guy. We talk about pass rushers and stuff like that. That's a good. And then Preston Zinter's another kid that it's not quite clear exactly where he'd play. Likely linebacker. There's some serious interest there. I mean, serious interest there.
Yeah. There was God dang, you mentioned something I forgot. Oh, we'll talk about wide receiver here in just a minute. Proctor is a name that a lot of people mention. And look, that guy's an amazing talent, and there's no doubt about it. But I think there's still some work there to be done as far as whether he can be eligible at Notre Dame. And so I think that, based off of things I've heard, still some work to it's certainly possible and that type of thing. But I don't think it's 100% certain at this point that he can get into Notre Dame. But Notre Dame's recruiting the heck out of him, so there's certainly a chance. And they're gonna, and that happens a lot. I mean, when you have guys that are young and they're just there's a lot of guys that are kind of close to the borderline, and then they realize, hey, football, I got to do this, and they really come on strong. And so I totally expect that with him. But just so people understand, that it's not a sure thing that he can get in at this point. You guys mentioned wide receiver, and because we're going to get into that, and that was my very next topic. The wide receiver coach, if they keep Dell or they don't, if they have to hire a wide receiver coach, obviously defensive coordinator is a huge position, but I think wide receiver right now is one of the most important hires that Marcus Freeman is going to make, because as Chris went and looked at the list, and I did today as well before, because I would do the preparation for this and what are we going to talk about. And I looked at that list and I was like, I cannot name one guy on the list, on our target list, that I would say Notre Dame leads for. And I mean, literally, I just seriously couldn't name one guy.
Been like that for a while, yeah.
Yeah, and whoever this guy is going to come in, it's going to be like Mike Mickens when he came in after, Todd Light, and everybody's expecting him to pull off a miracle, and it's almost impossible to pull off a miracle when you don't have a relationship dealt and built with these guys. So that hire is going to be extremely important, Jamie, and that guy's got to hit the ground running right out of the gate recruiting, because they're going to have a big hole to climb out of.
100%. And then also they got to be really on like junior film of all of these guys. And like, because it always happens, right? There's some guy who was barely played as a sophomore who, becomes a star as a junior, and Notre Dame has to get in on those guys early, like very early. So, that's a great analogy with Mickens and the kind of situation that he took over too, because, there really isn't, like, Tate is the only guy that you would say that they really have. I wouldn't say for sure they lead or whatever, but they're the only guy that you say, if he picked Notre Dame tomorrow, you'd be like, okay, like I could see that happening. But none of the other guys, it would be like shocking. It would be shocking if all of a sudden we heard, oh, this guy's coming to campus in January, whatever. We're like, what? Oh, wow, that's great. Like, that's just kind of where they're at right now, right? And
don't you think that says
tough.
Something about the decision that needs to be made then?
It 100% does. It 100% does, right? And also, too, like when you're looking at what happened at receiver in this class, and it's not Dell's fault that C.J. Williams wanted out or Amorian Walker was a flake from the start, whatever, right? That's not his fault. But probably his fault for not developing more relationships with a bunch of other guys that he was whatever, and probably his boss's fault for not being like, hey, we need to have more of a plan here, right? Like, so there's that part that goes into it too. And I mean, you feel bad for Del Alexander and how some things have played out, but some of the stuff is his own doing, and he's got to be able to like, uh, trust me, he'd have a much better chance of staying on as coach if he all of a sudden went and said like, CJ's coming because of me.
Mm-hmm.
He's staying with Notre Dame because of me, but that wasn't the case. And
Mm-hmm.
so now it's obviously like, and when you look at the status of 2023, I mean, it says a lot about where things stand.
Yeah. Anything
Well,
you
I'll
want
tell
to
you
add?
this: he'll have one thing. He'll be able to sell playing time. So
Yeah.
wherever the opportunity,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's big, right?
It
And,
is, yeah.
and so you say, hey, and it's just one of those things where.
But
the
Mickens
more
had
times-
that too. You know what I mean? He
Yeah,
had that
yeah.
opportunity too. So,
But
go ahead.
the more opportunity you get to be honest with kids, the better. So whatever it is, when you have the opportunity to be, what comes across as brutally honest, the better. So you go in there, you say, hey, man, we struck out a receiver in 22. We really did. We only got one guy. That's why we need you. And you being like kind of upfront and saying we struck out a receiver is going to make these kids trust you. Instead of trying to polish it up. And so anytime you have the opportunity to be honest and then work, pivot that and see your advantage, I think you're going to take it. And I think that this is a great opportunity for them to do that.
Yeah, no question. All right. Got a couple more topics. The first one is where do you think they're strong right now in 2023 recruiting, Chris? If you had to pick a couple positions, where do you think they're looking good right now?
Well, we talked about quarterback where they haven't got one yet, but they have pretty good base of
Interest,
guys
I'd agree.
to pick from. And obviously defensive end, they already have two freaking awesome guys. They have, the one running back, which I think is good. You talked about you would like to have another speedier guy like Price added to that group. I think when you have Cedric Irvin Jr. already in the fold, you can go ahead and concentrate on another guy like that. Same thing kind of goes at tight end. I think they're pretty good with Flanagan. They were in on a lot of guys, and maybe they'll still poke around on some of those other guys. But I'll tell you this. I know there were some guys that came to campus that, have long list of offers, and, Notre Dame was excited to have them on campus that after they got to campus, to your point, Mike, with Sawyer, they said, I don't know about him.
Yeah.
And it kind of let him go. So it's not like, don't think that Cooper Flanagan was a guy they settled for.
No
They're
doubt.
in on a lot of the top guys. And I was told right as soon as Cooper Flanagan got there that he was a guy they liked.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good spot. Offensive line, like you said, it seems a little. It's not quite nearly as porous as receiver, but they seem to be okay there, not the greatest as they would be. And I think those are probably the best ones. I mean, at corner, I see someone's asking about Malik Muhammad as well. It's hard to get an idea of this, what's going on there.
If you ask Notre Dame, they think they're very, very much in the thick of things. But then you see his ranking or his listing of top schools, and they're not even listed. And I don't understand the disconnect there, but
I don't either. And I had people in Texas that have no connection to Notre Dame telling me earlier that week that they expect him to end up at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
All right. And I've talked to people in his camp, and they say Notre Dame's still in it. They're still in it. And I never really got a good explanation of if they're in it. Why aren't they in the top 12? But I'm told they're doing the right things. I mean, it's really an odd situation there. If put it this way, if he hadn't put out that top 12 sans Notre Dame, Notre Dame would be considered by many to be the favorite.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting there.
Yeah, that was a weird one. Go ahead, Jamie.
I was going to say that I think, what Chris said about the quarterback situation, I think that's just critically important that they're in a good spot with these guys. Get one of these guys in the fold quickly who's an elite guy, because even though I like Steve Angeli, I think he's a good prospect, but Steve Angeli isn't a guy that wide receivers are like, man, Angeli's going there. Man, I want to play with Angeli, right? And you can say what you want about like the Elite 11 process or whatever, but he went to the camps and he didn't get picked. So he didn't get picked for that. He was downgraded to a 3-star, after like kind of like a shortened junior season. He had a great senior season, no doubt, right? And I'm not saying it changes how he's viewed as a prospect, but he's not that guy that, trust me, like Carnell Tate is like, if Dante Moore chose Notre Dame, Carnell Tate's going to want to go to Notre Dame more
Yeah,
because
no
of it.
doubt. Yeah.
So I think that, and
It's
there
going to
just
be
hasn't been.
it's going to be
Yeah,
tough because you want to wait for more because you like him, and it's kind of like Vizzini. You know, I know a lot Notre Dame. A lot of the coaches like Vizzini, but you know, if you take him, great. But what happens if Alabama offers? What did you just do? You know what I mean? And that's the problem that they're going to have with a guy like that because I don't care who you are. If you grew up in Alabama and you know you have a chance to play for Nick Saban and they keep getting national championships and quarterbacks named for Heisman Trophy, and Nick Saban suddenly offers you after not offering you, that's going to change things. And so that's going to be tough for Vizzini in order to try and convince schools that, hey, take a chance on me because, you know, I won't flip to Alabama if Nick Saban suddenly decides to offer. So that's a tough situation to be in. And you got a guy like, say, Jackson Arnold, who I know Notre Dame likes a lot. But what if Jackson Arnold is getting close to pulling the trigger somewhere else, getting frustrated with Notre Dame because they're not saying come here because they're waiting on Dante Moore, and then Dante Moore chooses Michigan, or you know what I mean? It's a tough battle. It really is onto what to do. I want to address this because people have been asking about this, and this is just a comment. This guy says, "Throw us a bone and address the current wide receivers leaving rumors, please." And I know that this has been mentioned a bunch, and there's these rumors circulating around. We've heard all the rumors. You know, we've investigated the rumors. I'm not going to say that they're untrue, but I'm also not going to say that they are true. All I will say is I think what we need to do is be patient and let's just see what happens with the wide receiver coaching position. And once there's a decision and that solidifies itself, I think we'll have a lot more clarity on what's happening with wide receivers and who's being recruited and who may leave and who won't leave and that type of thing. That's all I really want to say about it. I think that's the most important thing is, and I'm sure there's conversations happening with everybody right now about the situation. And but you got to have somebody coach this bowl game, and then you have to make a decision on what you're going to do at the wide receiver position. And I think that decision will impact a lot of things in the end. You guys want to add anything to that?
Well, just the guys coming back to like the upperclassmen, right?
Yeah,
Who
yeah,
might
yeah.
leave too. That's another big thing. So
Exactly.
which is, yeah, all that has to factor into how, you know, what Marcus Freeman's going to decide too. So I think it's to say that it's like, yeah, you mentioned about the defensive coordinator. Obviously, that's going to be a critical hire and what they decide to do there. But wide receiver, arguably more critical.
Yeah,
like you said.
I would say so. I would really say so, especially considering right now.
Yeah.
So the big elephant in the room is NIL, guys. This is not going away. And you know, Christian kind of mentioned some stuff that we'd heard about what's going on right now, and you know, I think Marcus Freeman was being very truthful in that, hey, we're not going to get into this and start breaking rules. But I do think that there are things that Notre Dame can do in order to kind of help their situation without necessarily breaking the rules. Do you think that that's going to happen? Because my fear is Notre Dame is going to be Notre Dame, and that is they're going to be way late, as always, to adjust to this. And it's going to be a very big negative impact on the program. Now, I think that what has happened in the last probably 4 days is probably even eye-opening to Notre Dame. And so I'm going to guess that there's a lot of very strong, important conversations that are going to happen here in the next couple weeks about how can we address this. But it's funny because all these Irish fans are like, hey, man, you know, some some alumni just need to pony up the cash. And it's like, well, where's your cash, man? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, where's your cash? Where are you throwing your money into it? And it's just one of those things that everybody says, well, they should just do this. And it's like, well, who? I mean, you know what I mean? Who? And I think that Notre Dame has always been very, if they're raising money, it's for academics. And we'll get to the athletic parts of things, but it's all academic. They're going to have to do some shift here to figure something out, because I think you can quickly fall behind if you're not on top of this, and if you try and just push this under the rug, a tidal wave is going to come over you until the NCAA addresses it. And there's no doubt the NCAA is going to address this at some point, because whatever they got away with now, they're going to find much more creative and better ways to circumvent the rules and bend the rules and snap the rules and break the rules and completely obliterate the rules. It's going to get even worse. Thoughts?
It was wild with Jimbo and him just basically admitting like, oh yeah, we cheated before, but now, like, I mean, in not so many words, like,
yeah,
everyone was cheating before, and now it's just legal.
Yeah,
like,
that's so right? True, like, though. It is.
Yeah, and it's 100% why.
But here's
those
the thing:
guys are going to A&M for they're going there because of that.
But see, here's the thing that people don't realize: they think that it's okay. Well, now we just kind of made it legal. No, they're still doing the same cheating stuff that they were doing, which is, your parents will get X amount of dollars, and we'll find them new jobs. That is still happening. That is still 100%. Happening. 100%. But we're also going to give your son this because legally we can do that. So it's cheating on top of now the legal cheating, and we're still bending the rules on the legal cheating on top of that. And Notre Dame has never or won't and never has got involved in any of that. So it's tough.
The reason why I think the NIL stuff is not going to be, I mean, it is a big deal right now, but the reason why I don't think Notre Dame is going to be as late as they typically are responding to this kind of stuff is because Marcus Freeman kind of already was asked about it. He already kind of addressed it. He knows it's a problem. And
they know, yes.
They know. They're very aware, right? So, I mean, and yeah, they can't organize anything, but like, I don't think that they're going to be organizing, but there will be back channeling going on, talking about like, this is what we need and this is whatever. And like, and if you can get people to sponsor the name of the head football coach, the Dick Corbett head football coach and all this kind of stuff.
I agree 100%.
People otherwise.
I agree 100%. 100%.
And that's the kind of way that I almost see it being like, instead of like people endowing this position coach, it's like people are going to endow like a position. It's like the whatever linebackers or whatever, right? Like the linebacker backers or whatever from the rich alum here, right? Like that's the way I kind of see Notre Dame kind of doing it or whatever in some other kind of way that isn't obviously directly related with Notre Dame, but in some kind of roundabout way that like, I think I would be surprised by the spring if we didn't see a lot more traction with it from a Notre Dame perspective.
Yeah, they're going to have
That's
to.
That's exactly what happened with Texas, right? Texas, They said that we should give every offensive lineman $50,000.
Yep.
I don't need to know who the recruits are. I don't know who they are. So
Yep.
Texas, you don't need to say, hey, if you cut, it's not even cheating. Like, just this is what our offensive linemen get. They get $50,000 a year. So that I think is the way, and I think the NCAA is looking into that. But if there's nothing wrong with that, if there ends up being nothing wrong with that, I think that's going to be, they're going to be that'd be helpful to Notre Dame. Yep, and that'll be it. So but it'll get crazy, right? Because now
you better be figuring that out now. You know what I mean? You better be figuring out that. Look, try and figure out a way to make it happen. And of course, the difference, and it's so funny because I think a lot of fan bases think we have the best fan base in the world or the most supportive fan base in the world and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and I'm sure Notre Dame fans feel that way too. But when you look at this situation, I think it's pretty obvious that they don't. Notre Dame doesn't, because nobody's stepping up to the plate like they are at Alabama and Texas A&M and Texas and all these other places. Nobody's stepping up to the plate to do it at Notre Dame right now. And, and I think part of it is a lot of the Notre Dame alumni are smart businessmen. There's no benefit for them. You know what I mean? For everybody else, this is a big ego thing. It really is. It's a big ego thing. And you've been around all these kind of, or at least I have, some of the alumni who think that, I'm really important because I do these types of things. But I think in the end, hopefully Notre Dame will do that. Hey, Christian's got to run. He's got a meeting he's got to get to, so I'm going to drop him off, and Jamie and I will close this thing out. But thanks, Chris.
Right.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
And Jamie and I will close it out. Okay, Jamie. We only got a few more topics, and we're done. Okay, bud?
All right.
First one is, and I think that this is really important. I don't think Irish fans probably thought about this either. And that is, when Swarbrick mentioned that there are a bunch of people making phone calls, I got to believe that almost every offensive line coach in the country has called Marcus Freeman trying to get this job. I mean, when you look at what they have last year and this year, as far as the two classes coming in, this has to be the most attractive job as an offensive line coach when you consider the types of kids you get to develop and deal with and the talent that they've signed in these last two classes. I'll be shocked if it isn't just an elite offensive line coach, because to me, I think this is one of the easiest sells. I think the easiest sell in recruiting is Notre Dame should have the best kicker and punter in history every year, because hardly any of them ever make it to the NFL. So if you're not going to make it to the NFL, you should go to the place where you can get the best education. And, so if that isn't Stanford and Notre Dame, I don't know what it is. But when you talk about O-line coach, Jamie, this has to be an easy sell. It really does, because it's a great place to coach. You get to deal with fantastic kids. And on top of that, you have more talent coming in these last two classes than literally even Alabama, I think. I think Notre Dame's two classes at O-line are better than Alabama. I honestly believe that. And that's got to be really encouraging and really inviting for an O-line coach.
Yeah, and I think if you look at, say, like the ACC as a conference, all the 14 teams in them, like outside of Clemson, like every other school in the conference is lucky to sign one 4-star in a class. Like that's just reality. That's what it's been like at those schools. So instead, when you're at Notre Dame, you sign 3 or 4 basically every year, right? Rather than having 3 or 4 maybe on your whole team. Like, I mean, who doesn't want to work with the best material? And I mean, outside of like Alabama in general and some of the guys that they can get from the South, and Georgia obviously specifically too have done a tremendous job recruiting it.
Yeah.
Like Notre Dame is right up there in terms of being able to get the talent consistently. Enough guys have done it. Like it has to be the most attractive job out there that guys are beating down. Like they're beating down the door for it. They're trying to get in there. And I would think just Notre Dame in general, there's a lot of guys who, climbers right now, like in the coaching circles, this is a place that they would want to be because, they see that recruiting's on the uptick and look how many guys have gone on from Notre Dame and advanced their careers too, even recently. So I think there's a lot of that makes it extremely attractive, but specifically O-line, it's got to be the most attractive job out there.
It has to be. And so I really think that if they do make a change at offensive line, which I think we both anticipate they will, I got to figure that they're going to do it. And here, Jamie, and this is why I think they're going to be in good position as trying to hire an O-line coach and wide receivers coach and even a defensive coordinator if they do. And there's two schools of thought when it comes to defensive coordinator, and that is, well, if Marcus Freeman can't do it, you should probably get kind of a experienced guy, somebody who's been around the block, somebody that Marcus Freeman can trust. so he doesn't have to micromanage that situation and can focus on being a head coach. And I think that there's a very valid thing and reason and argument for that type of thinking. But I also think that this is an opportunity to kind of build that super you know, young, super talented coaching staff at Notre Dame, kind of like Urban Meyer did with a lot of the young guys that he had, and they all went on to be great coaches. And you know, and I think that Nick Saban's done a really good job of that too, finding a lot of kind of young guys and developing them, and then they go on. And I mean, if you look at the head coaching tree of Saban, I mean, a lot of guys were there. You know, a lot of guys that are head coaches now were under Saban, and so. But the key for a lot of young coaches is attach yourself to a shining star, right? And I think a lot of people in the coaching industry think of Marcus Freeman as a shining star, somebody who could really take off like an Urban Meyer. And if you can attach yourself to that guy can take you to a lot of places. And it's all about job security. It's all about, you have to win. And if you got a great head coach who's motivated and does the right things, and you've got a great program, then you have job security. And so, I think that they have a chance to kind of get some guys that are young, upcoming, bright, aggressive, position coaches that could really take the program to the next level. But how do you see that if you're trying to decide and you're Freeman? Do you go after the young, aggressive guy? Do you look for experience? How would you handle that at DC? How would you handle that at O-line? How would you handle that at wide receiver?
I think, it's interesting because when I think of like a lot of times veteran coaches maybe get a bad rap as some of these guys are,
oh yeah,
they don't like recruiting, whatever,
yeah.
right? But you'll see guys like Bill Lewis was a guy who liked recruiting and was good at it, right? And
a really good coach,
really good coach. And John McNulty, right, is a guy
a little older but
works,
fantastic recruiter, yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's all about like, do they check those boxes of, you don't want to just get a guy at any of these spots that just is like, man, this guy's just got go as a recruiter, but he can't coach. And that was the one thing with Brian Kelly is that I'll say, and people could question the level of the coaching, whatever. I can't really say that he had like, especially the last 5 years, didn't ever have bad coaches on his staff. The staff was always good. Maybe some guys didn't work up to the standard they should have as recruiters, but they were always pretty good coaches. So it's finding that guy who developed whatever, but really that person who kind of checks that box of like, they can take that to the next level, which is why at wide receiver, to me, wide receiver too, it's a young man's game, right? Yeah. It's a young man's game at wide receiver in terms of connecting with those guys. They're like maybe the most like personality driven 7-on-7, like they're the stars of college football and of like high school football. And these are the guys, I don't want to call them divas, but they're just definitely guys who like,
well, it's quarterback, like wide receiver. That's what it is. Quarterback, wide receiver right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to get someone who appreciates that and is, really like is going to be able to kind of connect in that way as a coach and as a recruiter. And I think that's just absolutely crucial. Defensive coordinator, I would say like, because Marcus Freeman is going to be so involved, you still need that defensive coordinator, whether it's an eternal guy or it's someone else that is going to be able to connect and people want to play for. Like, I want to play in this guy's defense, right? And I think that's just critical, right? And so as much as you respect Clark Lee and the job he did, and, even though he's a young guy, he's not like wasn't an overly active, involved recruiter. Like that it has to be someone who takes ownership of the defense schematically, obviously, but also from a recruiting standpoint. Like that has to be like, kind of Freeman's right-hand man, really, right? Like, him and Reese have to be his 2 right-hand men, I guess, right? And so I think what it comes down to is, do you have somebody so Jim Knowles, they hired him at Ohio State, and obviously he's a tremendous coach, whatever,
Yeah.
right? But I really don't know anything about Jim Knowles as a recruiter. He was at Duke for years. I don't know how he recruited to Ohio State or whatever. He's a bit of an older guy, right? But you can't just bring on a guy who's like, I'm only here about the ball. Joe Moorhead, he's all about the ball. He hates recruiting, right? And which is why that would have been a bad hire for Notre Dame. And that, as people didn't think about it in those terms. But so it has to be the balance and finding that. And which means that it might not be someone that has a Freeman connection. So that to me is going to be the most interesting thing. Can you hire someone that you don't know and find that connection and understand that and realize and do the background and realize this is the right person for it? And it's not all about, because you want someone to fit into the chemistry of the staff, and that all is part of the interview and all of the process of learning about the person, and also who fits into what, he wants to be a player's coach. He is a player's coach. This is what he wants. So Chip Long, that type of guy, is not a player's coach. You can't hire that kind of guy on defense. So personality is going to matter a lot.
I think so, and especially the type of what they're looking to do. And it's tough because I think that sometimes you get an older guy, and I don't think Marcus Freeman is going to want to kind of change what they're doing defensively. So whoever they get is going to have to really fit within the framework of what he believes in, and so that's going to limit the pool, certainly. And then sometimes I'll disagree with you a little bit in that I think that that Kelly had some crappy coaches.
Early for sure.
Yeah, the Van Gorders and Diacos and
after,
Charlie Molnars
and from 2017 on.
But I
think that's one of the main reasons why they were.
I agree 100%.
Because I think there wasn't a spot where you were like, man, this guy's a terrible coach. Where early on the times you're like, how did this guy get a job at Notre Dame?
Yeah.
That was the reality of like the early years with Brian Kelly.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think he did a better job as time went on. I didn't think Atri Denson was a good coach. I just didn't. I didn't think Todd Light certainly was a bad recruiter. He was an okay coach, but I don't think that he was highly effective either. So there are a lot of guys that you can hire, but who's going to fit what you're trying to do? And I think guys who are successful and guys who know how to be successful also can recognize those traits in other people, right? And I've had somewhat success here at Irish Sports Daily. I've been able to last, and the reason I have, it isn't because of me. I've been able to identify guys who are good at what they do. You and Christian and Matt and JB and Greg now and a bunch of people I've had who've worked for me before, who've all gone on and had real successful careers in this industry. And I'm not saying that I'm hugely successful, but you have the ability, because you know what it takes to be successful. You know what I mean? And I think Freeman knows what it takes to get to where he's at. So he's going to be looking for those same qualities in who he's trying to hire. And sometimes that's easy, sometimes that isn't easy. But there is that battle of do I go young? Do I go, somebody who's really experienced? And I think that's a really tough question to answer. For a defensive coordinator, I think it's really going to come down to personality. Will that person connect? Do they believe in what I want to do defensively, so I feel comfortable that I can turn that over to them and I don't have to constantly look over my shoulder? That's going to be a hard position for him to hire. Now, maybe that's Mike Elston. Maybe that's Mike Mickens. Maybe that's somebody else. But I think that's going to be a really difficult position for him to fill, because I think it's so important for him to find that particular person. Thoughts?
Yeah, because I think I mean, just early of what he, based on what he's saying, and obviously the role of what he wants to play in as a recruiter, I think it would be too much on his plate for him to be someone who's kind of hanging over the defense the whole time. Like, I think it would wear him down, and
Oh,
I don't
totally,
think
yeah.
I don't think
Especially if he wants to spend that much time on recruiting. He's not going to have the time to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think with that, I think it's critical. That's why he needs to have like complete trust and also too, in order to get who he wants to get or have that person go on to be, you want to have a certain amount of autonomy where he's a sounding board, but he's not everything. It's not Marcus Freeman's defense. It's that person's defense. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to be super important. And whether that's, he has the trust in, Elson or Mickens or whoever, or someone else from the outside, he has to have that trust there. He has to have that trust, just like he would trust Tommy Rees to kind of run the offense.
Yeah. All right, folks, I hate to cut this short. I know we have a lot of guys in the chat asking questions, and I apologize we can't get to them. This is a lot more stuff I've thrown on Jamie's plate and Christian's plate when it comes to this YouTube live stuff we haven't done before. So they have a lot of stuff that they have to do. So he can't stick around and answer all these questions. So, and nobody wants to listen to me ramble all day either. But we will be back. And the next time we do have a show, which will be very soon, we're going to answer, or at least I have a show. I know you and Greg are going to be doing something here soon again. But next time I put together a show, it'll be more customer and listener and watcher oriented. We'll just spend most of the time answering your questions. So I apologize. You guys spent the time. Please come back to the next one, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions. So thanks for joining the show. We'll let you know when we got another one coming soon. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please click the subscribe button and also click the bell so you know when we're live. So appreciate it, and we'll talk to you real soon on ISD TV. Thanks for listening to us.